The attention performance trinity includes three interrelated components: the mind, the body, and the environment, and it is the key to understanding and improving your attention performance. I'm Dr. Smilik, and you're about to learn another strategy designed to optimize your attention performance. The attention performance strategy we will cover at the end of this segment involves primarily the mind and body components of the attention performance trinity. Let's start with some background. Take a look at this photograph of a beautiful river that is flowing through a leafy forest. Now think a little more about your conscious experience. How clear is the image, and how detailed is it? If you're like me, you feel like you have a clear and detailed percept of the entire image all at once. And you probably feel that you had the detailed and complete percept immediately after the photograph was displayed on the screen. Now let's see if our thoughts about our experience of the photo are in fact correct. In the following demonstration, you will see two versions of a photograph that are identical with the exception of one object, which differs between the two versions. Your task is to find the difference between the two images as fast as you can. However, both versions of the photograph will not be presented on the screen at the same time. Instead, the images will be presented one at a time, alternating at a relatively quick rate, with each image appearing for roughly half a second. If you are in a group, raise your hand when you find the difference between the images, but don't say what the difference is out loud so that you don't ruin the demonstration for others in the room. Ready? Here we go. Often, quite a few people fail to see the difference between the two versions of the photograph. Did you miss it? Now let's watch the images alternate one more time, and if you didn't see the change the first time, I would like to draw your attention to the brick wall of the building in the center of the scene. Notice that a large sign is appearing and disappearing right in front of you. Many people completely fail to see large changes in demonstrations like this. If you didn't see the change the first time, you are probably quite surprised that you initially missed it. Let's try another one. Here is another set of alternating versions of a photograph. Again, the two versions of the photograph are identical with the exception of one object that differs between the two versions. Your task is to find the difference between versions. If you're in a group, remember to avoid blurting out the difference. This time, you may have completely failed to see an entire chair appearing and disappearing right in the foreground of the scene. So what's the main point of the demonstration? Well, if you actually had a detailed and clear perception of the entire image, as we discussed earlier, then you should have been able to detect the change almost immediately. But this is typically not the case. Many people fail to see a rather large change, an entire sign appearing and disappearing, even though it was repeated over iterations of the two photographs. This is referred to as change blindness in the research literature, and it shows that contrary to our beliefs, what we perceive is not a detailed and perfect replication of the visual world. In fact, our belief that our percepts are perfect and detailed replicas of the external world is actually a very compelling illusion. An illusion referred to in the scientific literature as the grand illusion of perception. Why is it that our perception of the external world is not a photographic replica of the world? One reason is quite straightforward. Our eyes have what amount to be hardwired limitations that prevent us from forming a detailed perception of all of the information in the field of view. Let me explain. This is a schematic of the human eye. The light blue arrow represents the movement of light as it enters the eye. As you can see in this image, light moves through the cornea, that's the part of your eye on which you put your contact lens, then through the lens, which focuses the light at the back of the eye. The back of the eye contains the retina, which is composed of light receptors that catch light energy and transduce it into neural signals. The neural signals leave the eye via neurons that exit through the optic nerve and connect to the brain, where the visual signals are processed. For present purposes, one of the key facts about the eye that you should remember is that only a small area of the retina, called the fovea, has enough light receptors to convey detailed information about the external world, and only this area has receptors that code for visual color. Light receptors outside of the fovea do not code for color and are very sparse, conveying only grayscale, low-resolution information. Here is an actual photograph of the retina in the back of your eye. As you can see, the fovea is a small dark red region, and it occupies only a small area of the retina. The yellowish disc on the right is a place where the neurons and blood vessels leave the eye in a bundle called the optic nerve. Critically, there are no photoreceptors in this area, which means that the eye is blind to the light information that hits that part of the eye, creating what is known as a blind spot. Given the size of the fovea, this is a rough depiction of what your brain actually perceives when shown a paragraph of clear text. Your brain likely perceives only the small central part of the visual field in full detail, and the rest is perceived with much lower resolution. Now, of course, this is not what you actually experience, right? How come? Well, the eyes actually do not stay stationary, but dart around the visual scene with rapid movements known as saccades. After each saccade, your eyes remain relatively stationary for roughly a quarter to a half a second. The time when the eye stays relatively stationary is called a fixation, and it is during this time that the visual system receives information from the external world. As you move your eyes around the scene and fixate on different objects, the brain essentially stitches together the detailed information from the snapshots taken by the small foveal regions of the retina. The remainder of the information that is not fixated is just filled in by your brain, according to its best guesses about what you should have seen based on past experience. So what you end up seeing is partly based on the sparse information coming into your eyes, and also partly based on the brain's expectations of what it thinks it should see. This video was taken from a portable eye tracking device worn by a person while driving a car on the road. The eye tracking device recorded the scene in front of the driver as well as the moment-to-moment eye fixations of the driver. In the video, eye position is shown as a red circle that appears to be moving around the scene as the person scans the scene in front of him. There's also a large purple circle and a purple cross overlaying the scene, but you should ignore these. The resolution is a little on the low side, but it will give you at least some idea of how the eyes are moving in a typical driving scenario. As you watch the video, notice that the driver is fixating the other cars, signs, rearview mirror, and the speedometer on the dashboard. Also notice how the eyes are making jerky movements, which we refer to as saccades, and remain relatively stationary for short moments we called fixations. Importantly, there were many regions in the scene that were never fixated, which means that there's a lot of visual information the driver is missing. But it doesn't feel that way. That's because, as we already noted, the brain stitches information from fixations together and fills in the rest based on prior experience, thus giving the individual the feeling that they have a detailed, continuous view of the scene. In this schematic depiction, the orange arrows represent the sequence of eye saccades, and the orange circles represent moments of eye fixation. The depiction again shows that there are portions of the visual scene that were not fixated. Critically, the research shows that objects that are not fixated, that is, directly looked at with the eyes, fail to be processed and so fail to be consciously seen. And because of the grand illusion of perception, you don't even feel like you're missing anything. In this case, because the signal was not fixated, it would have been completely missed. Let's now return to the change blindness demonstration. Why did you fail to see the differences between the versions of the photos? The reason is that your eyes failed to fixate the changing object. While the change remained outside of your fixation, it remained outside of your consciousness. Only after you fixated the object was it consciously perceived. In addition, your eyes have to maintain fixation in a given location long enough for the visual system to be able to process the information hitting the fovea to the level of identification. In the case of change blindness, if you don't fixate a given object across the presentation of both displays, you would very likely fail to perceive the change. The critical point here is that your eyes have to select specific visual information for detailed and conscious processing. This is referred to as overt selective attention. Selective attention is needed because your visual system has a limitation, namely, it can't process everything in detail all at once. This brings us to our critical attention strategy, which you can employ to reduce attention-related errors. Based on what we know about eye movements and how the eyes work, you should consider employing a systematic, active looking and scanning strategy. As you progress on your route, there might be a tendency for you to get lazy with your eyes. But you can prevent this by checking your scan pattern every now and then and ensuring that you're keeping your eyes moving to various relevant objects in the visual field. To help you, you might develop strategic scanning sequences. While you want your eyes to be actively scanning the scene, make sure you don't move them too fast so that your visual system has enough time to process the information in the fovea during each fixation. If your fixations are too short, your visual system might fail to correctly identify objects even though you are fixating them. This is Dr. Smilik reminding you that attention strategies only work if you take the initiative and regularly implement them. Don't be passive and risk committing a catastrophic error. Be active and practice your attention strategies each and every day.